Lie on this table. Don't scream. 5 words. English. But Keiko Tanaka heard them in Japanese, translated by the voice she'd been warned about for months. The voice that belonged to people who would watch her die on this cold metal table. Fort McCoy Detention Center, Northern California, January 12, 1945. The temperature outside held at 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside this converted warehouse that now served as a field hospital, the overhead fluorescent lights burned white and merciless. The air carried the sharp bite of antiseptic, a smell that should have meant cleanliness, but instead promised pain. Keiko was 22 years old, born in a fishing village on Okinawa. She knew exactly what happened to women who lost wars. The metal beneath her spine conducted cold through the thin prison uniform they'd given her 3 days ago. Standard issue. Gray cotton that smelled like lye soap and someone else's fear. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table, white-knuckled. The kind of grip that comes from knowing you might need to hold on while the world does terrible things to your body. In her hair, carefully wrapped in a square of silk cloth and tucked behind her left ear, was a pill, small, white, cylindrical, cyanide, 7 seconds from bite to death. Maybe less if you crushed it with your molars and let it dissolve fast into your bloodstream. 7 seconds of burning in your throat and chest, 7 seconds of your heart forgetting how to beat. Then nothing. Better than whatever was coming next. The American soldier stepped closer. He wasn't holding a scalpel. He was holding something silver, something that caught the fluorescent light and threw it back in sharp angles. Medical instruments always looked like weapons when you were the one lying down, when you were the one waiting for the cutting to start. Private James Henderson, 23 years old, Cleveland, Ohio. Keiko didn't know these details yet. She only knew he was tall, that his uniform was clean, that his hands wore surgical gloves the color of winter skin, that his eyes held something that looked almost like kindness, which somehow made everything worse. Demons should look like demons. That's what made them easy to hate. 43 Japanese women occupied this makeshift hospital, all captured after the Battle of Leyte, all processed through the same fear, all carrying the same instructions from the same officers about what Americans did to female prisoners. Yuki Matsuda lay on the examination table to Keiko's right, 19 years old, munitions assembly. Her breathing came too fast, shallow. The kind of breathing that precedes screaming or fainting or both. Sachiko Kimura was somewhere behind them, 28, field nurse. She'd seen enough war wounds to know what bodies look like after torture. That knowledge didn't help. Sometimes knowing made it worse. Akiko Hayashi occupied a corner table, 31. They didn't talk about what Akiko did before she became an auxiliary. Some stories were too heavy to carry into new suffering. All of them had heard the same warnings. All of them knew what Captain Takeshi Nakamura said would happen in American captivity. All of them had pills. Henderson moved closer. He said something in English. The language sounded harsh, guttural, nothing like the flowing sounds of Japanese. Grace Yamamoto stood beside him, 25 years old, Sacramento, California, a Japanese face speaking English, a traitor or a survivor or both. Grace translated. Her voice was soft, careful, the voice of someone who understood that every word right now carried the weight of life or death. He needs to listen to your breathing. Breathing. Why would demons care about breathing? Why would Americans who plan to inject diseases and test chemicals and document your screaming care, whether your lungs functioned properly? The question made no sense. Nothing about this made sense. The silver thing in Henderson's hand was a stethoscope. Keiko didn't know this word. She only saw the metal disc, the rubber tubes, the strange instrument that seemed designed for listening. But listening to what? Listening for what? The memory came unbidden, unwanted. August 1944. Guam Island. 300 miles of ocean between then and now, but the memory played crystal clear. Captain Nakamura stood before 200 female auxiliaries in a concrete building that baked under the Pacific sun. The air inside was thick enough to chew. Sweat ran down spines and collected in the small of backs and made everyone's uniform stick to skin. His voice cut through the heat like glass breaking. America Jin wa Akuma da. Americans are demons. He was 41 years old. Career military, 20 years of service. A face weathered by sun and command, eyes that didn't blink when he showed them the photographs. Chinese women, naked, strapped to tables. Bodies open, organs exposed, faces frozen in expressions that existed beyond pain, beyond horror. In some territory that language couldn't reach. These Nakamura said are what Americans do. The women in the photographs were actually victims of Unit 731, Japanese military experiments, human vivisection without anesthesia, biological weapons testing on living subjects, frostbite experiments, plague exposure, things that would eventually be documented in war crimes trials that most of the world would prefer to forget. But Nakamura said Americans did it. He said it with the authority of an officer, with the certainty of someone who'd seen things, with the weight of the Imperial Japanese military behind every word. They inject diseases, he explained. They test chemicals. They record everything. Every reaction, every scream, every moment of your dying, all for science, all for their twisted American science. Then he distributed the pills. Small white cylinders passed hand to hand down rows of women who suddenly understood that death might be the kindest option. Nakamura explained the dosage, the method, the timing, 7 seconds, maybe less. This, he said, is mercy. This is honor. This is the gift of a quick death instead of a slow one. Keiko took her pill, wrapped it in silk torn from the hem of a comfort scarf her mother had sent, tucked it into her hair where she could reach it quickly, where one smooth motion could bring it to her lips. Standard issue. Like ammunition, like bandages, like the lies that made the pills necessary. Now 5 months later, that pill pressed against her skull through layers of hair and silk in desperation. The stethoscope touched her chest, cold metal through the thin fabric of the prison uniform. Not skin, just fabric. Keiko flinched anyway, the involuntary recoil of prey. Henderson pulled back immediately, said something to Grace. His voice carried no anger, no impatience, just something that sounded almost like concern. "Does this hurt?" Grace translated. "Are you comfortable?" The word landed in Keiko's mind like a stone thrown into still water. Ripples spread outward, disrupted everything. Demons didn't ask about comfort. Torturers didn't care about permission. Men who planned to hurt you didn't stop when you flinched. Yet here was Henderson, waiting, the stethoscope suspended in air between them, his eyes asking a question that his mouth had already formed. Something was wrong. Something didn't match the pattern she'd been taught to expect. Keiko forced herself to nod, forced her body to stillness. Henderson approached again, slower this time, telegraphing every movement. The stethoscope touched her ribs through fabric. He moved it in a pattern, upper left, upper right, lower left, lower right. The metal disc traveled across her chest like he was following a map, like he was searching for something specific. The rubber tubes connecting the stethoscope to his ears looked like black snakes. Medical equipment always looked alive when you were afraid, always looked like it might move on its own. Henderson's gloved fingers never touched her skin. Professional, clinical, the kind of distance that medical training demanded, the kind of respect that Geneva Convention required. Keiko didn't know about Geneva Convention. She only knew that Japanese military doctors never wore gloves, never asked permission, never moved this carefully around female auxiliaries. The tent canvas walls flapped in the January wind. Somewhere outside, diesel generators hummed their mechanical prayer. Other women were breathing, some crying, none screaming. They'd been ordered not to scream. Last words from their officers before capture. Don't scream, don't give the Americans the satisfaction. Die with dignity. So they followed orders even here, even as enemies examined them. Even as everything they'd been taught about capture collided with a reality that refused to match expectations. On the next table, Yuki was being examined by Corporal Margaret Davis, 26 years old, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, corn country, middle America. Everything the propaganda said was soft and weak and couldn't possibly have won a war against the empire of the rising sun. Margaret checked Yuki's lymph nodes, gentle fingers on throat tissue, palpating, testing, looking for swelling that might indicate infection or disease. Yuki flinched, expected strangulation, got medical examination instead. The disconnect showed on her face. Confusion, the kind of bewilderment that hurt worse than physical pain. Because physical pain, you could understand. Physical pain matched expectations. But gentleness, professionalism, care, that was dissonance. That was everything they'd been taught, inverted. Henderson withdrew the stethoscope, wrote something on a metal clipboard, medical shorthand that Keiko couldn't read, numbers and abbreviations that would become part of her permanent record. Then he did something unexpected. He showed her the stethoscope, held it out, let her see the metal disc, the rubber tubes, the earpieces. He gestured, asking through Grace if she wanted to understand. Grace translated. This is for listening to your heart, your lungs, to check if you're healthy. Healthy, not dying, not suitable for experimentation, not categorized by how long you might survive certain procedures. Just healthy, like health mattered, like her body was something worth preserving rather than something to be used up. The thermometer came next, glass and mercury, the universal medical instrument. Henderson showed it to her first, explained through Grace. Under your tongue, 30 seconds, just to check for fever. The glass slid under Keiko's tongue, tasted like metal and alcohol, the rubbing alcohol they used to sterilize it. She held it there, counted silently, watched Henderson watch his watch. Precise, professional, boring in its routine. War was supposed to be chaos and violence and cruelty, not thermometers and clipboards and men who timed 30 seconds exactly. Henderson removed the thermometer, held it to the light, read the mercury level, wrote more notes. Normal. Grace translated. No fever. That's good. Good. As if her health was good news, and as if they wanted her alive and well rather than dying slowly for their research. Keiko's worldview was cracking. Small fissures at first, hairline fractures in certainty, but spreading, growing, threatening to shatter everything she'd been taught about enemies and evil and the American war machine. Bar Robert Hayes entered the examination area, 39 years old, Boston, Massachusetts, Harvard Medical School, graduated 1931, 14 years of practice, 3 years of war. He'd seen enough wounded soldiers to last several lifetimes. Now he was seeing something else, something that would eventually end up in military tribunals. He moved to Sachiko's table, started examining visible injuries. There was a coral cut on her left calf, infected, red inflammation spreading from the wound site, the kind of infection that could kill if left untreated, the kind Japanese military doctors had looked at and said ganbaru. Endure. Hayes immediately called for supplies. Iodine, clean bandages, antibiotic powder, things in adequate supply for American forces, things that could save a limb, save a life. The iodine burned when it touched infected tissue. Sachiko gasped, sharp intake of breath, pain that promised healing rather than harm. Hayes worked methodically, cleaning the wound, explaining through Grace what he was doing and why. Patient education, the radical concept that people deserve to understand their own medical treatment. Keiko watched from her table, watched an American doctor treat a Japanese enemy's infected wound with the same care he'd give an American soldier. Watched him use expensive medicine on someone whose country had killed his countrymen. The numbers wouldn't be declassified for decades, but they surrounded them now. America spent $4.50 per day per prisoner on medical care. Japan spent 12 cents on its female auxiliaries, sometimes nothing. The evidence was everywhere. Fresh bandages, real medicine, clean instruments, doctors who treated patients instead of subjects. Nurse Patricia Roberts moved through the space with quiet efficiency. 30 years old, somewhere in America before the war, now here, labeling blood samples, recording temperatures, building files that documented care rather than cataloging suffering. She labeled Keiko's blood vial with careful handwriting. Name, number, date, not for experimentation, for treatment, for baseline health records, for monitoring. The realization came slowly, crept up through layers of propaganda and fear and expectation. They were actually checking for diseases, tuberculosis, dengue fever, malaria, the illnesses that killed more Japanese soldiers than American bullets. The preventable, treatable conditions that Japanese military ignored in their female auxiliaries because women were expendable. Now enemies cared more about preventing disease than Keiko's own officers ever had. The tent grew warmer as more bodies filled the space, as more examinations proceeded, as more women encountered the strange cognitive dissonance of gentle treatment from people they'd been taught to fear above all else. Henderson finished Keiko's preliminary examination, gave her a small card. Grace translated, "This shows you're cleared for regular meals, full medical treatment, access to all facilities, privileges, not torture, not experimentation, not the documented dying that Nakamura promised, just basic human care, warmth, food, medicine, the minimum requirements of the Geneva Convention that America actually followed." Keiko held the card, thin paper, official stamps, her name written in English letters she couldn't read. Proof that she existed as a person rather than a prisoner number. The examination was ending. Henderson and Margaret and Hayes were moving to other patients. The process continuing. Systematic, thorough, professional. Grace leaned close, spoke quietly. "Just for Keiko, they're checking everyone for tuberculosis. It kills a lot of people here. They want to prevent it. Treat it if you have it. Keep everyone healthy." Healthy, that word again. Landing like artillery in carefully defended positions. Keiko's hand moved unconsciously toward her hair, toward the silk-wrapped pill. 7 seconds to freedom. 7 seconds away from whatever came next. But what if what came next wasn't torture? What if everything Nakamura said was lies? If he lied about American medical experiments? What else was false? The superiority of Japanese military honor, the necessity of death before surrender, the certainty that capture meant fates worse than dying. The questions opened like wounds, like something breaking inside that had held too tight for too long. Henderson was putting away his equipment, cleaning the stethoscope, making notes. His movements carried no menace, no anticipation of violence, just the routine motions of a medical professional finishing one patient and preparing for the next. He had a photograph tucked in his chest pocket, barely visible, corner of a frame peeking out. Someone waiting at home. Wife, children, family who wanted him to survive this war and come back to Ohio and return to whatever life looked like before bullets and death in overseas service. He was human, tired. His uniform showed coffee stains, evidence of long shifts and inadequate sleep and the grinding exhaustion of war that afflicted everyone regardless of which flag they saluted. Demons didn't get tired, didn't drink coffee, didn't carry photographs of people they loved. The contradiction was unbearable. Keiko sat up slowly, the examination complete. No injections, no experiments, no documentation of screaming, just medical care, just the routine health check that any hospital would perform on any patient. Grace helped her down from the table. Steady hand, kind eyes, a face that looked like Keiko's but spoke a language Keiko didn't understand. "You did well," Grace said. "Tomorrow is breakfast. Then more medical follow-up if needed. You're safe here." Safe. The most dangerous word yet. Because if she was safe with enemies, then she'd never been safe with allies. If Americans protected her, then Japanese officers had failed to. If this medical care was real, then the propaganda was lies. And if the propaganda was lies, then everything was lies. The war, the honor, the necessity of suffering, the virtue of death, all of it built on foundations of falsehood. Keiko walked back toward the barracks. January wind cut through the thin uniform. Cold, honest, real. The pill in her hair felt different now, heavier or lighter. She couldn't tell. 7 seconds to death. But death from what? From torture that hadn't come, from experiments that didn't happen, from American demons who gave medical care and asked about comfort and treated infected wounds with expensive medicine. That night, lying on a cot with actual blankets in a barracks with actual heat, Keiko stared at darkness and tried to rebuild a worldview that made sense. Outside, American guards walked patrol. Inside, 43 Japanese women breathed and wondered and slowly began to understand that everything they'd been taught was backwards. The last thought before sleep came was strange, unexpected, almost frightening in its simplicity. If they lied about the medical experiments, what else did they lie about? And more terrifying, what if America wasn't the enemy? What if it never was? The questions hung unanswered in the dark. Tomorrow would bring breakfast, whatever that meant, whatever that revealed, whatever truth waited in the morning light of a California January in 1945. But tonight, Keiko Tanaka, 22 years old from Okinawa, former radio intercept operator for the Imperial Japanese military, was alive, unharmed, treated, documented, protected, by demons who asked about comfort, by enemies who checked for tuberculosis, by Americans who apparently believed that even in war, even with people who'd killed your countrymen, basic human dignity still mattered. The pill stayed in her hair, wrapped in silk, ready. But for the first time in 5 months, Keiko wasn't sure she'd need it. 6 o'clock in the morning, January 13th, 1945. The sound came from somewhere outside the barracks. Not a whistle, not screaming, not the harsh bark of Japanese officers demanding immediate assembly. A bell, just a bell, simple, almost gentle, the kind of sound that belonged to churches and schoolhouses and peacetime mornings when the world wasn't trying to kill you. Keiko opened her eyes to unfamiliar darkness. The barracks was warm, actually warm. Heat came from radiators along the walls, metal contraptions that hissed and clanked but pushed warmth into air that should have been freezing. The blanket covering her body was wool, real wool, thick enough to trap body heat, heavy enough to feel like protection. She'd slept, actually slept, not the half-aware dozing of someone expecting violence, not the fitful unconsciousness of exhaustion too deep to resist, but actual sleep, the kind where your body trusted the world enough to let go completely. This fact terrified her more than anything else. Corporal Margaret Davis entered the barracks with a clipboard. Morning light filtered through windows that had glass instead of paper. Her boots made soft sounds on the wooden floor. No stomping, no deliberate intimidation. Just the practical footsteps of someone doing a job. Grace Yamamoto followed 2 steps behind, always translating, always mediating between two worlds that spoke different languages, but shared the same confusion about what happened next. "Good morning," Grace translated Margaret's words. "Breakfast in 15 minutes. Medical clearance is required, but you all passed yesterday's examinations. Please prepare yourselves and gather in the main corridor." Yuki sat up on the cot beside Keiko's. Her face held the expression of someone who'd woken expecting nightmare and found only morning. The disconnect showed in her eyes. That particular confusion that came from mercy in places you expected cruelty. "Breakfast," she whispered. "Or poison." Sachiko was already standing. 28 years old, field nurse. She'd seen enough war to know that hope was dangerous, that expecting good things led to worse disappointment when the inevitable bad things arrived. "Does it matter?" Her voice was flat. "We're already dead. We just don't know it yet." Akiko said nothing. She was checking her pillowcase, making sure the pill she'd hidden there was still present, still ready. Her fingers found the small cylinder wrapped in cloth, and some of the tension left her shoulders. Insurance? Just in case breakfast was everything they'd been warned about. The women moved slowly, stiff from sleeping on cots that were somehow both harder and softer than what they'd grown accustomed to. Prison uniforms wrinkled from a night of actual rest, hair that needed washing, bodies that carried the accumulated exhaustion of months. Margaret waited patiently. No rush, no countdown, no threat of punishment for moving too slowly. This patience was its own form of psychological warfare. Kindness that undermined every defensive position they'd built. Gentleness that dissolved certainty about who the enemy really was. "They're taking us to showers first," Grace translated Margaret's next instruction. "There's hot water, soap, clean towels. Take your time." The shower room was larger than expected. Tiled walls, multiple shower heads, drains in the floor, industrial but clean. The kind of facility designed for processing many bodies efficiently, but without the cruelty that efficiency sometimes demanded. Steam was already rising. Someone had turned on the hot water before they arrived. Let it heat. Prepared the space like you'd prepare for guests rather than prisoners. Keiko approached the nearest shower head. Chrome fixture, American made. She turned the knob. Water came immediately. Warm, getting warmer, building to actual heat. Her hand registered the temperature before her brain processed what it meant. Hot water, real hot water. Not the cold buckets of auxiliary camps. Not the twice-monthly allowance of lukewarm water that never got the salt and grime completely clean, but actual hot water that came from pipes and didn't run out after 2 minutes. She stepped under the stream, fully clothed at first. The prison uniform soaked through immediately. Gray cotton turned charcoal. Water ran down her face, her neck, collected in fabric and dripped to the tile below. Then she removed the uniform, let it fall in a heap, stood naked under water that was almost too hot. That bordered on painful. That felt like the first honest thing to happen in months. The heat spread across her shoulders, down her spine, over the 17 scars that Lieutenant Hiroshi Hayashi had carved into her back with a bamboo rod between August and December 1940. The water touched each raised line of scar tissue, each permanent record of punishment, each reminder that Japanese officers had hurt her more than American enemies ever had. Steam filled the room, thick enough to obscure vision, heavy enough to breathe in gulps, the kind of humid warmth that belonged to bathhouses in peacetime, in a world where water was abundant enough to waste on comfort. Soap appeared beside him. Margaret was distributing bars to each woman. Not lye soap that burned skin. Real soap, the kind that lathered, the kind that smelled like something other than chemicals and harsh cleansing. Lavender. Keiko held the bar to her nose. The scent was impossible. Delicate, floral, the kind of luxury that belonged to rich women in cities. Not prisoners of war in California detention centers, not enemies being held by a country that should have hated them. She washed slowly, methodically. Soap in her hair, soap on her skin, suds that formed and rinsed away and took months of accumulated fear with them. The water at her feet ran gray at first, then clearer, then almost pure. Around her, other women were discovering the same impossible truth. Hot water, real soap, time to actually get clean. Yuki started crying, silent tears mixing with shower water. Her shoulders shook. She was washing and weeping and couldn't stop doing either. The cognitive dissonance was breaking something inside all of them, something that had held rigid for too long, some certainty about suffering and enemies and what capture was supposed to mean. Margaret stood near the entrance, not watching them shower, just present, available, patient. She'd brought clean towels, white cotton, soft, the kind that absorbed water instead of just spreading it around. Take your time, Grace translated again. No rush. We have plenty of hot water. Plenty. The word landed like a small bomb. Plenty meant abundance, meant resources that exceeded immediate need, meant a country wealthy enough to give hot showers to prisoners while fighting a war on two fronts across two oceans. Keiko stood under that water for 7 minutes. She counted. 7 minutes was how long Lieutenant Hayashi had made her stand at attention in freezing rain as punishment for weakness, for crying when the telegram came about her brother Takeshi dying at Saipan. 7 minutes of punishment then. 7 minutes of mercy now. The inversion was complete. Everything backwards. Every expectation violated. Every certainty undermined. When she finally turned off the water, the silence felt loud. She wrapped herself in the white towel Margaret offered, soft cotton against clean skin, warmth trapped against her body. Her reflection in the metal mirror showed someone unfamiliar. Clean face, wet hair, eyes that couldn't quite process what was happening. A woman who'd expected death and was getting basic human dignity instead. The other women were finishing, wrapping in towels, standing on tile that held residual heat from hot water. All of them looked confused. All of them wore the expression of people whose worldview was cracking in real time. Clean uniforms waited in the changing area. Not new exactly, but clean. Washed, dried, folded, with actual undergarments that fit, with socks that didn't have holes. They dressed in silence. What was there to say? How do you articulate the experience of expecting torture and receiving hot showers? How do you explain to each other that everything you've been taught might be lies? Walk to the mess hall took 3 minutes, down corridors that had windows, past rooms that looked like offices instead of interrogation cells, through a facility that felt more like a school than a prison. The smell hit them before they entered. Food cooking. Actual food. Not the cold rice and watery miso that constituted rations, not the pickled vegetables that were supposed to provide nutrition, but mostly provided salt and bitterness. Real food, cooking, the scent of butter, of something frying, of bread toasting, of smells that belonged to abundance and peace in a world where breakfast was more than survival calories. Keiko's stomach clenched. She hadn't smelled food cooking in 8 months. Japanese auxiliary camps didn't cook. They distributed cold rations once a day. Rice balls, pickled plums, sometimes dried fish if supplies were adequate. Always cold, always just enough to keep working, never enough to feel satisfied. The mess hall doors opened to a space larger than expected. Tables arranged in neat rows, metal trays stacked by the entrance. Utensils, actual utensils. Forks and knives and spoons that implied trust. That suggested prisoners might be allowed to hold implements that could theoretically be weapons. And napkins. Paper napkins beside each place setting. During a war, when paper was valuable, when everything was rationed, when conservation was patriotic duty, they were giving napkins to prisoners. Private Robert Chen stood behind the serving line, 24 years old. Chinese-American from San Francisco. His family ran a restaurant before Executive Order 9066 sent them to internment camps. Now he served food to Japanese prisoners of war with the kind of efficiency that came from growing up in the restaurant business. He smiled at Grace, said something in English that made her smile back. Easy camaraderie between people who shared language even if they didn't share everything else. Grace turned to the women. Welcome to American breakfast. The words should have been simple. Instead, they carried weight, promise, threat, the suggestion that whatever came next would somehow be definitive. Keiko picked up a metal tray, moved down the serving line. Chen was putting food on each tray with careful portions, measuring, making sure everyone got the same amount. The first item was scrambled eggs, real eggs, not powdered, not reconstituted, but actual eggs that had been whisked and cooked in butter and were still steaming. Yellow, fluffy, the kind of protein that Japanese officers ate while auxiliaries got rice. Toast came next, 2 slices, browned, with butter already melting into the bread, creating golden pools in the holes, making the surface shine. Butter, during wartime, given to prisoners. Fried potatoes followed. Cubed, crispy edges, salt glistening on surfaces, starch and fat and seasoning. Peasant food elevated. Comfort food made with actual care. Orange juice in a small glass. Vitamin C, scurvy prevention. The kind of nutritional planning that suggested someone wanted them healthy, wanted them to survive, wanted them to not develop easily preventable diseases. And then, 3 strips of bacon. Keiko stared. Yuki stared. All 43 women stopped moving and stared at what was on their trays. Bacon, pork, fatty, expensive, impossible pork that existed as rumor in wartime Japan. That officers sometimes ate, that rich civilians in cities might have access to, but never auxiliaries, never women, never the expendable ones. Here, 3 strips each, on metal trays, given to prisoners of war. The meat was still warm, grease collected in small pools around each strip. The edges were crispy, browned. The fat had rendered and caramelized. The smell was overwhelming, salt and smoke and richness. In Japan, meat was luxury. Pork was celebration. Bacon was something that belonged to propaganda posters about American excess, about wasteful enemy nations that didn't understand discipline or sacrifice or the spiritual strength that came from doing without. Here, on her tray, 3 strips, just given, like it was normal, like prisoners deserve protein. Henderson walked through the mess hall, checking on patients, making sure yesterday's examinations hadn't revealed anything requiring immediate follow-up. He stopped at their tables, spoke through Grace. Eat slowly if you haven't had much protein recently. Your digestive systems need time to adjust. It's rich food. Don't make yourselves sick. He was worried about their digestion, not their interrogation, not their compliance, not their willingness to provide intelligence. Their digestion. The concern was absurd, impossible. completely backwards from every warning about American captivity. Keiko sat at a table, placed her tray down. The metal made a soft sound against wood. Around her, other women were doing the same, all of them staring at food that shouldn't exist. She picked up a fork. The metal was clean. No rust, no bent tines. Actual silverware given to people who were supposed to be enemies. The eggs came first. She took a small bite. The protein hit her tongue. Butter, salt, the rich fatty taste of real eggs cooked with actual care. She chewed slowly, swallowed. Her stomach received the food cautiously, like it wasn't sure what to do with nutrition that wasn't just survival rations. The toast was next, still warm. The butter had soaked into the bread, made it rich, dense, satisfying in ways that cold rice could never be. Carbohydrates that tasted like comfort instead of just fuel. Then bacon. Keiko picked up one strip. The grease coated her fingers, made them shine. The meat was still warm enough to feel alive. She brought it to her mouth, bit down. Oh God. Salt exploded across her tongue. Fat followed, then smoke. The complex flavor of meat that had been cured and cooked properly. Crispy edges gave way to tender centers. Protein and fat and seasoning combined into something that tasted like abundance. Like a world where there was enough. Like peace, Oiti. She closed her eyes, not to pray, to process, to contain the sensory overload of flavor that her mouth wasn't prepared for, that her memory of food couldn't quite accommodate. This tasted like everything propaganda said America was. Excessive, wasteful, rich beyond reason, but also generous, sharing, willing to give good food even to enemies. When she opened her eyes, Yuki was crying. Tears streamed down her face while she chewed. She was eating bacon and weeping and couldn't stop either activity. The tears fell into her eggs, mixed with the scrambled protein, made everything salt from two different sources. Sachiko laughed. The sound came out broken, fractured, like something that had been held together too tightly and was finally coming apart. Kore wa usoda, she said. This is a lie. It has to be a lie. But she kept eating. They all kept eating. Because lie or not, the bacon was real. The taste was real. The fact that enemies were feeding them better than allies ever had was real. Akiko ate mechanically. No expression, no tears, no laughter, just methodical consumption. Fork to plate, plate to mouth, chewing, swallowing, repeat. But she finished every bite. The first time she'd finished a meal in 2 years. The mess hall filled with the sound of women eating, forks on metal, quiet conversation. American soldiers at other tables eating the same food. No hierarchy of meals. No officers eating better than enlisted. Just everyone eating the same breakfast. Keiko took another bite of bacon. The flavor was consistent, still rich, still impossible. Still evidence that everything she'd been taught was wrong. If America had this, if they had bacon and butter and eggs and orange juice even during war, even for prisoners, then what else did they have? What else had propaganda lied about? The questions accumulated like wounds, like something bleeding inside her, certainty about the world. Private Henderson sat at a small desk in the corner, writing in a journal, personal documentation, the kind of record-keeping that happened outside official channels. His handwriting was neat, methodical, the penmanship of someone educated, someone who read books and thought about things beyond just survival. January 13th, 1945. The Japanese women cried over breakfast, not because it was bad, because it was good, because we treated them like people, because bacon shouldn't make someone weep, but it did. My wife Ellen wrote asking how I can be kind to the enemy. I told her they're not the enemy. Their government is. These women are just women, scared, hungry, human. Tomorrow we start comprehensive medical documentation. Doc Hayes found evidence of systematic abuse from their own officers. This is going to be bigger than anyone thinks. Bigger than just winning the war. This is about proving that even in war, some values matter. That even with enemies, humanity counts. I gave them bacon for breakfast. They cried. That tells you everything you need to know about how their own military treated them. He closed the journal, stood, walked toward the medical wing. There was work to do, documentation to complete. evidence to gather, evidence of crimes committed by Japanese officers against Japanese women, evidence that American medical personnel would catalog with the same care they cataloged everything else, evidence that would eventually end up in military tribunals and change how the world understood war crimes. But that came later. Right now, there was just breakfast, just bacon, just 43 women learning that everything they'd been taught about enemies was backwards. Keiko finished her meal slowly, savored each bite, let the richness settle, let the protein convince her stomach that yes, this was real, this was happening, this was being freely given. When she was done, Chen collected trays, smiled, said something that Grace translated. He hopes you enjoyed breakfast. There's lunch at noon, dinner at 6, same amount every day. You'll get used to it. Get used to it. As if abundance was normal. As if 3 meals a day with actual protein was something you could take for granted. As if being an enemy prisoner didn't mean starvation and suffering and the slow grinding death of malnutrition. The women returned to the medical wing, more examinations scheduled. Comprehensive health assessments, the kind of thorough documentation that required multiple sessions. Dr. Hayes was waiting, 39 years old, Boston accent that Grace translated away. Harvard Medical School credentials that meant he knew exactly what he was looking at when he examined bodies that carried evidence. He started with Sachiko, basic examination, height, weight, visible injuries. He found the coral cut on her calf, the infection spreading red from the wound site, the kind of injury that could kill if bacteria got into bloodstream, the kind of injury Japanese military doctors looked at and prescribed endurance. Hayes called for supplies immediately. Iodine, clean bandages, antibiotic powder, the expensive medicine that America had and Japan didn't, that American prisoners received and Japanese auxiliaries never got. The iodine burned. Sachiko gasped. Sharp pain, but pain that promised healing. Pain that meant someone cared whether infection spread. Pain that was inflicted to help rather than to punish. Hayes wrapped the wound, explained through Grace what she needed to do. Keep it clean, change dressings daily, watch for fever, come immediately if red lines spread from the wound. Patient education, the radical idea that people should understand their own treatment, that medical care was a partnership rather than something done to you. He moved to Yuki next, found the circular burn marks on her inner wrist, small, deliberate, the exact diameter of cigarette tips. He stopped, went very still, called Margaret over quietly. How long have you had these marks? Yuki's voice was barely audible. Grace translated. Since October. Lieutenant Tanaka used them for punishment when we made mistakes in assembly. Lieutenant Tanaka, not American, not enemy, but her own commanding officer. Hayes photographed each burn, medical documentation, evidence being preserved. Click, click, click. The sound of truth being archived. Then Keiko. Hayes asked her to remove her shirt for back examination. Standard procedure. Margaret helped with the buttons. The fabric came away. 17 scars, parallel lines equally spaced, created by bamboo rod wielded with deliberate force. The signature of Lieutenant Hiroshi Hayashi. The permanent record of punishment distributed between August and December 1940. Hayes stopped breathing for 3 seconds. Then he exhaled slowly, called Margaret over. His voice was controlled, professional, furious underneath. How long have you had these? Since August through December last year, Keiko said. Grace translated. Who did this? The question hung in air that suddenly felt too thin. Naming an officer in Japanese military meant execution, meant betrayal, meant choosing survival over loyalty. But was it loyalty when the person you were protecting had carved scars into your back? Was it betrayal when you told truth to people who treated your wounds instead of creating new ones? Lieutenant Hiroshi Hayashi. Keiko's voice was steady. Infantry, 43 years old. My commanding officer. Hayes photographed every scar, multiple angles, close-ups, documentation that would withstand legal scrutiny, evidence for trials that nobody imagined yet but everyone would remember later. Why did he do this? Hayes asked gently. Keiko listed reasons. Each scar had a story. 3 strikes for arriving late to assembly. The morning after she received the telegram about her brother. 3 strikes for dropping rice ration during air raid drill. When B-29s came and everyone ran and she stumbled. 5 strikes for crying about her brother's death, for showing weakness, for being human. 6 strikes for refusing sexual advances, for saying no when Lieutenant Hayashi came to the women's barracks drunk and demanding, for protecting something he thought he had right to take. That last beating nearly killed her. Infection, fever, days of delirium, no medical treatment, just orders to endure. Ganbaru, the Japanese solution to suffering. Just endure it. Hayes wrote everything. Margaret photographed everything. Grace translated everything. Dorothy Williams at a nearby desk typed everything. Medical report, patient testimony, evidence documentation, all happening simultaneously, all creating permanent record, all building a case that nobody planned but everyone recognized as necessary. Over the next 3 hours, the pattern emerged. Sachiko had 12 scars from bamboo rod, plus 1 broken rib that healed wrong because no one said it properly. Yuki had the cigarette burns plus severe malnutrition, despite adequate food supplies for officers. Akiko had internal damage from comfort station abuse, plus chronic infections never treated. Midori, 27, had an old skull fracture never properly set, headaches that never stopped, vision problems, untreated traumatic brain injury. 70% of the 43 women showed signs of systematic corporal punishment from their own officers. 89% had untreated medical conditions that had been reported but ignored. 100% that showed severe malnutrition, despite Japan having adequate supplies for officers and male soldiers. Dr. Hayes wrote in his official report, pattern consistent with systematic abuse. Recommend immediate war crimes investigation. These women are victims of their own military. Not combatants. Victims. He called for Major William Bradford, 42 years old, prosecutor from Chicago, JAG Corps, the legal mind that would eventually turn medical evidence into courtroom convictions. Bradford arrived within an hour, reviewed the documentation, looked at the photographs, read the testimony transcripts. This is prosecutable, he said. War crimes, clear violations of military code even under Japanese law. We have everything we need. He sat down with the 43 women, Grace translating, Henderson and Margaret present. Official but not threatening. We are documenting evidence of war crimes committed against you by Imperial Japanese officers. Not by you, against you. Your scars are evidence. Your testimony matters. International law protects you now. The silence was profound. Then Yuki whispered, Nazy. Why Bradford's answer came through Grace. Because what was done to you was illegal, immoral, and the people who did it should face justice. Justice. For women. From enemies. The concept broke language itself. The world inverted completely. Enemies offering justice. Allies having committed crimes. Everything backwards from propaganda. Everything opposite from expectations. Keiko felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. Not from dizziness, from the complete reorganization of reality, from every certainty collapsing simultaneously. If Americans believed women deserved justice, then Japan's treatment of women was criminal. If enemies protected victims, then allies had failed to protect. If bacon breakfast and hot showers and medical documentation were standard enemy behavior, then everything about the war was lies. The pill in her hair felt different now. Not like salvation. Like evidence of how thoroughly she'd been deceived. Like proof that she'd been ready to kill herself rather than face mercy. That evening, after more examinations and more documentation and more evidence accumulation, Private Chen appeared with something new. Glass bottles, green, wet with condensation from ice. American writing on the labels, Coca-Cola. Keiko stared at the curved glass. She'd seen Coca-Cola in propaganda posters. American decadence. Wasteful luxury while the world starved. Proof that America was soft, weak, destined to lose against disciplined nations that understood sacrifice. Except America was winning, and somehow had enough resources to give soda to prisoners. Chen handed them out, one per woman, showed them how to use the bottle opener. The caps came off with small pops. Psh! Carbonation escaping, bubbles rising. The sound itself was foreign, playful. the opposite of war. Keiko had never tasted carbonation, didn't know what to expect from liquid that moved. She brought the bottle to her lips, tilted. Old liquid hit her tongue. Sweet, possibly sweet, bubbly, effervescent. The carbonation tickled her throat, cold sliding down. Sugar and bubbles and ice in January 1945 in a detention center in Northern California during the largest war in human history. This, Grace said, is what Americans drink. Every day, at diners, at drugstores, at baseball games, even during war, even here. It's normal. It's what we have. It's what we share, Yuki whispered. If they have this for prisoners, what else do they have? Sachiko answered, everything. They have everything we were told they didn't, and they're sharing it with enemies. The Coca-Cola was perfect, cold and sweet and fizzy, and American in ways that transcended simple beverage. It was a symbol of abundance that propaganda said didn't exist, of normalcy during crisis, of a country so wealthy it could give luxuries to prisoners because luxuries weren't luxuries. They were just Tuesday. Japanese officers drank sake while auxiliaries got water. American soldiers gave Coca-Cola to enemies. The contrast told you everything about which system valued human dignity. Night fell on February 1st. The barracks settled into uneasy quiet, women processing what they'd learned, that their scars mattered, that their pain counted, that enemies wanted justice for crimes committed by allies. For Yuki, the knowledge was too heavy. She lay on her cot, staring at darkness, thinking about the 3 women who'd taken their pills, Midori who jumped from Saipan cliffs, friends who died believing American captivity would be worse than death. They were wrong, but they were dead. Survivor's guilt pressed against her chest like physical weight. Why did she live when they died? What made her worthy of bacon breakfast and hot showers while they chose cyanide? Her hand found the pillowcase, found the small cylinder wrapped in cloth, the pill she'd kept despite everything, despite evidence, despite kindness, insurance against the moment when American mercy revealed itself as elaborate cruelty. Maybe that moment was now. Maybe this was the trap. Feed them, heal them, document abuse, then spring whatever torture waited. Better to die now, on her terms. 7 seconds, like Nakamura promised. She unwrapped the pill. White, small, freedom compressed into cylindrical form, brought it to her lips. Henderson was walking night patrol, standard procedure, checking on medical patients, making sure everyone had blankets, that the heaters worked, the boring routine of peacetime care during wartime detention. He saw movement in Yuki's cot, saw her hand at her mouth, recognized the motion instantly. Training kicked in. He moved fast, grabbed her wrist, pulled her hand away. The pill fell, bounced on wooden floor, rolled under the cot. Yuki fought, silent desperation, reaching, trying to retrieve the one thing that made sense, the one escape that matched expectations. Henderson held her, not restraining, protecting. His voice was urgent but gentle. Grace. Get Grace. Now. Other women woke. Sachiko, Keiko, Akiko. All watching, all understanding. Grace arrived within minutes, found Henderson still holding Yuki, still speaking words Yuki couldn't understand but recognized as concern. Tell her she's safe, Henderson said through Grace. Tell her we won't hurt her. Tell her she matters. Tell her she has value beyond what her officers said. Grace translated, soft words in the dark. Yuki was shaking, sobbing, the kind of crying that came from breaking rather than healing. Henderson didn't let go, just held her, let her cry, patient, present. The first time a man had touched her with intention to tear rather than to harm. The first time male hands meant protection instead of punishment. When she finally stopped shaking, Grace asked gently, why Yuki's voice was broken. My friends died believing American demons would torture them. I lived. I ate bacon. I learned they were wrong. How can I be alive when they're dead because of lies? Henderson spoke through Grace. His words were careful, chosen with precision. You honor them by living, by testifying, by showing the world what lies killed them. Dying now doesn't bring them back. It just gives more victory to the people who lied. You matter. Your life matters. Not because of what you do, just because you exist. That's what we believe here, that every person has value, even enemies, even prisoners, even women who were told they're expendable. You're not expendable, you never were. The words landed like medicine, like treatment for wounds that went deeper than bamboo scars. Dr. Hayes arrived, did quick assessment, checked pupils, pulse, made sure she hadn't ingested anything, then prescribed something radical. Tomorrow she gets extra breakfast, more protein, better cot, and daily check-ins with me. Not punishment. Care. He looked at Henderson. You saved her life. Henderson shook head. No, I just gave her the choice we should have given from the start. The choice her own officers never did. Live or die. But know that we want her alive, that her survival matters to us. That night, Yuki slept in the medical ward, under observation. Not punishment, protection. Margaret stayed with her. Quiet presence. Proof that kindness wasn't trap. The pill stayed under the cot. Evidence retrieved the next morning. Documented. Added to the growing catalog of how thoroughly Japanese propaganda had worked. 42 women still had pills. But after that night, fewer believed they'd need them. Because if Americans saved Yuki from suicide, maybe everything else they said was true too. Maybe enemies really did believe prisoners deserved to live. February 1st, 1945. 20 days after the bacon breakfast that changed everything. 20 days of hot showers and real food and the slow collapse of every certainty Keiko had built her life around. The testimony room wasn't what propaganda promised. No torture devices, no bright lights designed to blind and disorient, no instruments of pain waiting on metal tables. Just furniture, a wooden table, 4 chairs, a window that showed morning light, a stenographer named Dorothy Williams sitting with her typewriter fingers poised over keys ready to document truth instead of recording screams. 28 years old. Detroit, Michigan. Typing speed 90 words per minute. Fast enough to capture testimony in real time. Fast enough to preserve evidence before memory could fade or fear could silence. Major William Bradford sat across from Keiko. 42 years old. Prosecutor from Chicago. JAG Corps. He'd spent 3 years building cases, gathering evidence, preparing for trials that most people didn't know were coming. Trials that would eventually reshape how the world understood accountability. Grace Yamamoto sat beside Keiko, always translating, always mediating. The voice that made communication possible between two worlds that shared tragedy but spoke different languages. Private Henderson stood by the door, not guarding, protecting. There was a difference. Guards kept prisoners in. Protection kept danger out. The distinction mattered more than grammar could express. Coffee sat on the table, real coffee, steam rising. The bitter smell that meant caffeine and morning rituals in a world where prisoners could refuse refreshment if they wanted. Bradford spoke first. Grace translated. Whenever you're ready, Keiko, take your time. This testimony is completely voluntary. You can stop at any moment. You can refuse to answer any question. Your medical care continues regardless. Your treatment remains the same. This changes nothing about how we protect you. The words should have been simple. Instead, they carried weight, the weight of choice, of agency, of being treated like someone whose decisions mattered. Keiko had spent 3 nights preparing, writing notes in Japanese, organizing memories, putting dates to trauma, names to scars, locations to crimes that Japanese military had committed against its own women. She spoke. Her voice was steady, stronger than she expected. My name is Keiko Tanaka. I am 22 years old. I was born in Okinawa. I served as a radio intercept operator for the Imperial Japanese military from April 1944 to December 1944. I was under the command of Lieutenant Hiroshi Hayashi. Dorothy's fingers moved. Click, clack, click. The typewriter documented each word, each syllable becoming permanent record, each truth preserved in ink on paper. Between August and December 1940, Lieutenant Hayashi administered corporal punishment 17 times. I can describe each incident, the dates, the reasons, the witnesses. Bradford nodded. Grace translated his question. Please do. August 15th, 1944. 3 strikes with bamboo rod. Reason given was arriving late to morning assembly. Actual reason was that I had received telegram about my brother's death at Saipan the night before. I spent the night crying. I overslept by 4 minutes. Dorothy typed, the keys made rhythm, percussion for testimony, background music for justice. August 29th, 1944. 3 strikes. Reason given was dropping rice ration during air raid drill. B-29s came. Everyone ran. I stumbled. The rice spilled. Lieutenant Hayashi said waste was unacceptable. September 12th, 1944. 5 strikes. Reason given was displaying weakness. I cried during radio intercept duty. I was listening to American transmissions and heard them talking about the beach landing at Saipan, where my brother died. Lieutenant Hayashi said emotions compromised operational effectiveness. The list continued. Each beating documented, each justification recorded, each witness named. Yuki saw this one. Sachiko heard that one. Midori helped clean blood after another. The 17th beating came October 3rd, 1944. Keiko's voice didn't waver, but something in her posture changed, tightened. This memory carried different weight. 6 strikes. Reason given was insubordination and disrespect to superior officer. Actual reason was that Lieutenant Hayashi came to the women's barracks after drinking. He made what he called a comfort request. I refused. He said refusal from auxiliary personnel was unacceptable. I refused again. He administered punishment. The infection from that beating nearly killed me. Fever of 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Delirium for 3 days. No medical treatment. Other women brought water, changed cloths, tried to cool the fever. Lieutenant Hayashi said suffering built character. That endurance was virtue. That seeking medical help for disciplinary consequences was weakness. Bradford's jaw tightened. Professional control barely containing personal fury. He'd prosecuted criminals before. Murderers, thieves, men who hurt other men in fights and feuds. But systematic abuse of women under military command, by officers sworn to protect them, that was a different category of crime. Grace translated his next question. Are there other witnesses to Lieutenant Hayashi's pattern of abuse? 12 women can testify to direct observation. 7 experienced similar treatment. 3 are dead. They used the pills we were given after particularly severe beatings. After being told that American captivity would be worse, they chose 7 seconds of cyanide over the possibility of years of American torture. The room went silent except for typewriter keys. Click, clack, click. Death documented, suicide recorded. The permanent evidence of how thoroughly Japanese propaganda had worked. Bradford showed documents then. Captured papers from Guam. Japanese military records seized when American forces took the island. Can you identify any of these? Keiko looked at neat handwriting. Official stamps. The bureaucratic precision that Japan brought to everything, including atrocity. This is Lieutenant Hayashi's report dated October 4th, 1944, the day after my final beating. He writes here about disciplinary action taken against radio operator Tanaka. 6 strikes for insubordination. He documents his own crime. This report from Captain Nakamura dated August 10th, 1944. He requests additional cyanide pills for female auxiliaries. Says current supply is insufficient for unit size. Recommends 1 pill per person minimum, with extras for officers to distribute as needed. This document is supply requisition. Officers are allocated meat portions, sake, tobacco. Female auxiliaries are allocated rice and pickled vegetables. The caloric difference is approximately 600 calories per day. Officers ate while we starved, by design, by policy. Dorothy typed everything. Bradford took notes. Grace translated. Henderson stood witness. History was being documented in real time. The testimony lasted 3 hours. Names, dates, locations. A complete catalog of crimes committed by Japanese officers against Japanese women. Evidence that would eventually fill courtroom documents and newspaper articles and history books. When it was finished, Bradford spoke carefully. Grace translated precisely. Thank you, Keiko. This testimony, combined with medical evidence and captured Japanese documents, is sufficient for war crimes prosecution. Lieutenant Hayashi will face trial, so will Captain Nakamura, so will others you have named. Then he paused. The pause carried information. Bad news coming, news that required preparation. There's something else you should know. We received word this morning. Lieutenant Hayashi was captured in Manila 3 days ago. He's being transported to Fort McCoy. He'll arrive February 6th. That's 5 days from now. The air left Keiko's lungs, just stopped, like someone had reached into her chest and stolen breath itself. Lieutenant Hayashi, the man who carved 17 scars into her back. The man whose drunken comfort requests led to beatings that nearly killed her. The man who told her American captivity would be worse than his punishment. That man would sleep 200 yards away. Bradford continued through Grace. You don't have to see him. You don't have to confront him. Your testimony stands on its own. We have medical evidence. We have documents. We have multiple witnesses. The trial proceeds regardless. This is completely your choice. Choice. They kept giving her choices. The radical American concept that even prisoners had agency, that even enemies could decide, that even victims could say no. The next 4 days moved like dreams or nightmares. Hard to tell the difference when reality kept shifting. February 2nd through 6th, Keiko existed in strange limbo, knowing Hayashi was coming, knowing he would arrive, knowing she would have to decide whether to face him or let justice happen from a distance. The other women reacted differently. Yuki was terrified. Sachiko was angry. Akiko was blank. Midori wanted to watch him suffer. Normal responses, human responses, the full spectrum of how victims react when abusers approach. Henderson called a meeting. All 43 women present. Grace translating. Margaret and Dr. Hayes there for support. Lieutenant Hayashi is a prisoner. You are under United States military protection. He has zero authority here. He cannot approach you. He cannot speak to you. If he tries, he faces court-martial from our command. You are safe, protected by enemies from their own officer. The inversion was complete, everything backwards, every relationship redefined. Guards had become protectors. Enemies had become allies. Officers had become criminals. February 5th, Sunday afternoon, recreation time. Some American soldiers organized a baseball game in the exercise yard. Informal, casual. The kind of spontaneous activity that happened when young men had free time and needed something normal to do. They invited the women to watch. Most didn't understand. What was this game? Why hit a ball with a stick? Why run in a circle? Why cheer for something that didn't matter? Henderson explained through Grace. Baseball, America's game. We play for fun, for normalcy, for remembering that life exists beyond war. Want to try? Yuki volunteered. Shock moved through the group. Yuki who cried over bacon. Yuki who still had nightmares. Yuki who'd almost used her pill 3 times. Henderson handed her a bat, showed her how to grip it, how to stand, how to watch the ball. He pitched underhand, slow, easy, a gift more than a challenge. Yuki swung. Crack. The sound of wood meeting leather echoed across the yard, sharp, clean. The satisfying percussion of connection. The ball sailed toward outfield. Not far, maybe 30 feet, not impressive to experienced players, but contact, actual contact. American soldiers cheered, loud, genuine, whooping and clapping for a Japanese prisoner, celebrating her success like she was their teammate, applauding her effort, treating her like a person who'd done something worth acknowledging. Run, Henderson shouted. First base, go. Yuki ran, legs pumping, prison uniform flapping. Her feet kicked up dust from the exercise yard. February sun warming her shoulders. Wind in her face. Laughing, actually laughing. The sound strange and beautiful and completely unexpected. Joy in a detention center. Happiness in captivity. Life asserting itself despite war. The simple pleasure of running without anyone chasing her. Keiko watched from the fence, hands gripping chain link. This was what peace looked like. This was what happened when humans remembered they were human before they were anything else. Before nationality, before military, before all the categories that made killing acceptable. Just people, playing a game, laughing. The simplest and most radical act possible. That night, Keiko told Grace her decision. I want to see him. I want Lieutenant Hayashi to see me standing, to see me healthy, to see that American captivity didn't break me. that his warnings were lies, that everything he did to protect us from American demons was based on propaganda. I want him to see the scars he made. I want him to know they're documented. I want him to understand that justice is coming. Grace asked, "Are you sure?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." February 7, 1945. Lieutenant Hiroshi Hayashi arrived at Fort McCoy. Keiko watched from the barracks window, saw the transport truck, saw MPs escort him out. Handcuffs, dirty uniform, thinner than she remembered. The invincible officer reduced to just a man, just another prisoner. He looked smaller somehow, or she'd grown larger. Hard to tell which, maybe both. That night she couldn't sleep. Nightmares about bamboo rods, about his voice, about the night she nearly bled to death on the barracks floor while other women tried to stop infection with inadequate supplies and desperate hope. But when morning came, there was bacon breakfast waiting, hot shower available, American protection surrounding her like armor. She wasn't the same woman he'd broken. She'd been rebuilt by enemies with kindness, with them, using tools he'd never understood existed. February 8, 1945, 10:00 a.m., confrontation room, one-way mirror. Bradford and Hayes observing from the other side. Grace beside Keiko translating. Henderson and Margaret flanking her. Protection, support, witness. They brought Hayashi in, handcuffed, 2 MPs escorting. He saw Keiko. His face registered shock, recognition, something that might have been shame, but probably wasn't. Bradford spoke formally. Grace translated. "Lieutenant Hayashi, do you recognize this woman?" Silence. Long enough to be answer itself. "Miss Tanaka has testified that you administered corporal punishment 17 times between August and December 1944. She has provided dates, locations, and witnesses. Is this accurate?" Hayashi responded in Japanese. Grace translated his words with no emotion. "Military discipline. She violated regulations. Punishment was appropriate under military code." Keiko stood, slowly, deliberately. She turned her back, lifted her shirt, exposed 17 parallel scars, the permanent record of his appropriate punishment. These scars, each one has a date, a witness, a reason you called justified. "I already told Major Bradford everything. 3 strikes for grieving my brother, 3 for surviving an air raid, 5 for being human, 6 for saying no to rape. You documented them yourself." October 4, 1944. Disciplinary action taken against radio operator Tanaka. Your signature, your crime, your evidence. These Americans, they found every scar, photographed them, then fed me bacon and asked if I was comfortable. They gave me hot showers. They checked for diseases. They treated me like a person who mattered. You taught me Japanese officers were protectors. You lied. You taught me Americans were demons. You lied. You taught me death was better than capture. You lied. Everything you said was lies. Your own documents prove it. And now the whole world will know. Hayashi looked down. First time she'd seen anything resembling shame on his face. Too little. Far too late. Bradford presented the evidence then. Medical photographs. Testimony transcripts. Captured Japanese documents. Hayashi's own reports documenting disciplinary actions. The bureaucratic paper trail that would hang him. "Lieutenant Hayashi, you are charged with war crimes under the Geneva Convention. Torture, sexual assault, abuse of personnel under your command. Preliminary hearing is scheduled for March 15, 1945. Do you understand these charges?" Hayashi nodded, said nothing. What was there to say? The evidence existed. The scars existed. The testimony existed. Truth didn't require his agreement. They took him away. Keiko watched him go, powerless, like she'd once been. The symmetry was almost beautiful. Margaret hugged her. "You did it." "No, we did it. Americans taught me I could." The weeks that followed moved quickly. More testimonies, more evidence. 400 statements collected from female prisoners across all American camps. Pattern of systematic abuse emerging. Not isolated incidents. Policy, practice, the routine cruelty that Japanese military inflicted on its own women. 23 war crimes trials would eventually use this testimony. Convictions would follow. Sentences would be served. Justice would happen imperfectly, but happen nonetheless. In November 1945, Hayashi was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment. Not enough, never enough, but something. More than victims usually got. More than women usually received when men in power hurt them. Keiko attended the sentencing, watched him led away, felt empty, not victorious, not satisfied, just tired. The exhaustion of carrying trauma and finally being allowed to set it down. The war ended. Japan surrendered. The 43 women faced new question. What now? Return to Japan. Stay in America. Build new lives in the wreckage of old ones. Keiko chose to stay. Enrolled in nursing school, Oakland, California. Dr. Hayes wrote her recommendation. Margaret helped with applications. Grace tutored her English. She studied anatomy, pharmacology, patient care, learning to heal instead of operating radios, learning to help instead of intercepting transmissions, learning that the hands that once gripped stethoscopes in fear could eventually wield them with purpose. Graduation came June 1948. 25 years old, white uniform, RN badge, new identity built from the ruins of old certainty. Henderson attended with his wife and daughter. Margaret was there. Grace was there. Dr. Hayes pinned her badge. Former prisoners and guards gathering to celebrate life after war. She married Thomas Parker in 1949. Navy veteran, pharmacist. Kind eyes like Henderson. Patient enough to wait while she learned to trust again. Smart enough not to ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. Their daughter Patricia was born 1951. Named for nurse Patricia Robertson Grace. Patty for short. A child who would grow up knowing bacon breakfast was normal. That hot showers were guaranteed. That protection was something you could expect. By 1952, Keiko was working at Oakland VA Hospital, treating veterans, treating refugees, treating Korean War evacuees who arrived terrified because they'd heard propaganda about American medical experiments. One morning in August, a young Korean woman entered the examination room. Ji-yeon Park, 20 years old. From Seoul, refugee status. The intake form said suspected tuberculosis, required immediate screening. But what Keiko saw was herself 7 years earlier. Ji-yeon sat on the examination table, rigid, white-knuckled grip on the edge, eyes tracking every movement. The specific terror of someone who expected pain and didn't know mercy was possible. Keiko recognized every signal, had worn that same expression, had gripped that same table, had carried that same certainty that medical examination meant torture. She approached slowly, held up the stethoscope first, let Ji-yeon see it, explained through the Korean interpreter. This is for listening to your heart, your lungs. To check if you're healthy, it won't hurt. I promise. The exact words Grace had translated for her. The exact gentleness Henderson had shown. The exact humanity that had saved her life. Ji-yeon's breathing came too fast, shallow, the kind that preceded screaming or fainting. Keiko spoke again through the interpreter. Her voice was soft, patient, filled with recognition. You're safe here. I know what you've been told. I know what you fear. I was like you once. I was a prisoner who expected torture and received breakfast. American bacon breakfast, hot showers, real medicine. Everything they told you is lies, just like everything they told me was lies. You're safe. This is just examination, like checking your breathing. The same words. Full circle, 7 years of distance, same fear, same mercy, same choice between propaganda and reality. Keiko placed the stethoscope on Ji-yeon's chest, over the fabric, respectful, professional, the way Henderson had done, the way she'd done thousands of times since. Ji-yeon flinched, then held still, then started crying. Silent tears like Yuki on that first bacon breakfast. Keiko let her cry, stayed present, stayed gentle. Let the cognitive dissonance do its work. Let kindness dissolve certainty about enemies. When the examination finished, Ji-yeon whispered through the interpreter, "Why are you kind to me?" Keiko's answer was simple, true, carried the weight of 7 years. Because someone was kind to me when I expected cruelty. Because bacon breakfast taught me that humanity matters more than nationality. Because the table that terrified me became the table that healed me. Now I pass it forward. Ji-yeon would stay in treatment for 6 months, would learn English, would eventually become a medical translator, would help other Korean refugees understand that American hospitals meant healing, not harm. The cycle continued. Fear became understanding, became healing. One patient at a time, one gentle examination at a time, one person choosing to pass forward the mercy they'd received. Keiko saw herself in every terrified refugee, recognized the propaganda, used the patience she'd been shown, the gentleness she'd received, the humanity that Americans had demonstrated when she expected demons. The years passed. Healing happened slowly. Scars faded physically, if not emotionally. Life accumulated. Ordinary life. Extraordinary in its ordinariness. Until June 1965. St. Mary's Hospital, San Francisco. Keiko was 42. Head nurse. Respected. Accomplished. 20 years beyond the girl who'd lain on a cold metal table expecting torture. She picked up a clipboard. Patient 4C, routine admission, advanced cancer, esophageal, stage 3. 6 to 9 months without aggressive treatment. The name registered slowly, like delayed explosion. Hiroshi Hayashi, age 63. Her hands froze. The clipboard became impossibly heavy. 20 years collapsed. Bacon breakfast and bamboo rods existing simultaneously, past and present occupying same space. Margaret found her standing motionless. "What's wrong?" Keiko showed her the clipboard. Margaret understood immediately. "You don't have to take this patient. I can reassign him." Keiko thought about hot showers, about Henderson asking if she was comfortable, about Dr. Hayes treating infected wounds, about Grace translating mercy, about Americans showing her that humanity mattered more than hatred. "No, I'll do it." She entered room 4C. Hayashi was smaller than memory, gray, frail, dying slowly the way cancer killed. He saw her. Recognition dawned. Shock, shame, fear, the full spectrum of emotion that comes from facing victims when you're powerless. "Tanaka-san," he whispered. Keiko spoke in English, fluent after 20 years. "I'm your nurse today, Mr. Hayashi." She picked up a stethoscope, the same type Henderson had used, the instrument that had terrified her once, that she'd wielded thousands of times since, that had become symbol of healing instead of harm. She placed it on his chest, listened to his heart, failing, irregular, dying one beat at a time. "Lie still, don't worry," the exact words Henderson had spoken to her 2 decades earlier, the words that had promised safety when she expected suffering. Hayashi wept, quietly. "Old man tears. I don't deserve this kindness." Keiko's voice was steady. "Nobody deserves mercy. That's why it's called grace. Americans taught me that. Bacon breakfast and stethoscopes taught me that. Now I'm passing it forward." She treated him for 6 months, professional, distant, not friends, not forgiven, but not actively cruel either. Just nurse to patient, the relationship that medicine demanded. He died February 1966, peacefully, with dignity he hadn't granted others. Keiko attended his funeral, left a single white flower. Closure achieved imperfectly, but achieved nonetheless. Years continued forward. Patty grew up, became a doctor, pediatric surgery, carrying forward the legacy of healing, of choosing care over cruelty. Keiko retired 1982, 37 years of nursing, thousands of patients, countless lives touched. The girl who'd expected death becoming the woman who delivered life. At her retirement party, Dr. Hayes was there, 76 years old. Margaret, Grace, Henderson with his grown children, Robert Chen. 200 people gathered to honor someone who'd chosen to live when death seemed easier. They gave her a gift, a framed photograph. January 13th, 1945. Her first bacon breakfast at Fort McCoy. Young face, confused eyes. The moment everything changed. Caption read, "The meal that changed everything." Keiko spoke briefly, her voice still carried authority, still commanded attention, still told truth that people needed to hear. "People ask how I forgave, how I moved past what was done. I tell them I didn't forgive because I'm strong. I forgave because Americans showed me what strength actually looks like. Strength is feeding your enemy when you're hungry too. Strength is documenting crimes instead of committing them. Strength is offering choices instead of forcing obedience. Strength is mercy without victory, justice without vengeance. That bacon breakfast wasn't just food. It was a promise that even in war, humanity matters, that even enemies deserve dignity, that even the broken can heal. America kept that promise. I spent my life passing it forward. That's the America worth preserving. That's the America I saw on a cold metal table when a stranger treated my wounds instead of creating new ones. That's the America that saved me. She died 2019, 97 years old, surrounded by family. Three generations who existed because she'd chosen life over cyanide, because bacon breakfast had convinced her that living mattered. Her obituary was simple. Keiko Tanaka Parker, U.S. Army Nurse Corps retired, survived Japanese military service, thrived in American freedom. Remembered most for telling students the table that terrified became the table that heals. The difference isn't the table, it's the hands that touch it. The lesson lived beyond her, in Patty's patience, in the nurses she'd trained, in the values she demonstrated, in the proof that enemies could become healers, that victims could become witnesses, that breakfast bacon could crack worldviews built on lies, in the permanent testimony that even in humanity's darkest chapters, small acts of kindness could save lives. That hot showers and real food and medical documentation could be more powerful than propaganda. That treating people like people, regardless of nationality or history or uniform, was revolutionary. That America at its best understood something essential, something that transcended flags and politics in the machinery of war. That dignity matters, that justice matters, that every person on every table deserves to be asked, "Are you comfortable?" And that sometimes salvation arrives on a tray, carried by strangers, in the form of three strips of bacon that taste like everything propaganda said was impossible, like abundance, like generosity, like peace, like America keeping its promises even to enemies who'd been taught to hate it. That was the story. That was the truth. That was the bacon that broke her fear and rebuilt her future. That was what mattered most.